Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Bonnie, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Poetry Event Coordinator here at Brookline Booksmith. Today it is my absolute pleasure to host these three incredible poets, Heather Treseler, Lloyd Schwartz, and Tina Kane, for our third Thursday's Poetry Reading Series. Before I introduce our poets, I do have just a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, copies of these three wonderful books are available for sale at the back counter over there. I encourage you to support their work in whatever way you can, whether that means buying books, following them online, saying nice things to them tonight, and of course, being in this space is a huge way to support this work and to support poetry and to support our store, so thank you. Secondly, please keep your phones off or on silent while our poets are reading, and thank you for being considerate. Also know that this event is being live streamed to YouTube on this wonderful iPad right here. Hello. Audience members should not be visible to our YouTube viewers, but if you don't want to be live on YouTube, don't walk in front of it. Or charge the stage and you will be A-okay. And finally, we will have a Q&A at the end of the event, followed by a signing. So please hold your questions until the end, but definitely have them ready to go. This event, if you don't already know, is part of a monthly reading series that takes place here at Brookline Booksmith on the third Thursday of each month. Our September lineup is listed on our website if you'd like to come back for more poetry. And sometimes we occasionally have some bonus poetry events as well. So tune into our website, and we'd love to see you again. And now for the fun part, introductions. Heather Treseler is the author of Auguries Divinations, which received the 2023 May Sarton Prize and is a finalist for the New England Book Award in Poetry. She's also the author of Parturition, which won the Munster Literature Center's International Chapbook Prize and the Jean Pedrick Prize from the New England Poetry Club. Her poems appear in the American Scholar, Harvard Review, Iowa Review, the Irish Times, Narrative, and Kenyon Review, and her essays appear in Boston Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and in 8 books about American poetry. Recipient of the W.B. Yeats Prize, Frontier Poetry's Prize, and the Editor's Prize at the Missouri Review, she's a professor of English at Worcester State University and a resident scholar at the Brandeis Women's Studies Research Center. She lives outside of Boston. Thank you, Heather, so much for being here. And of course, Lloyd Schwartz is the Poet Laureate of Somerville, Massachusetts, Frederick S. Troy Professor of English Emeritus at UMass Boston, a major editor of Elizabeth Bishop's Poetry and Prose, and a music and arts critic for NPR's Fresh Air and WBUR's The Augury. He's been awarded NEA, Guggenheim Foundation, and Academy of American Poets Fellowships, and the Pushcart and Daniel Veruzian Prizes in Poetry, and the Pulitzer Prize for Criticism. His works have been selected for the best of American poetry, and his latest book is Who's on First? New and Selected Poems from U of Chicago Press. And thank you, Lloyd, so much for being here. And of course, last but not least, is Tina Kane. She is the founder, director of Writers in the Schools, Rhode Island, and from 2016 to 2024 served as the Poet Laureate of Rhode Island, where she lives with her husband and 3 children. In her capacity as Poet Laureate, she established her state's first youth poetry ambassador program in partnership with Rhode Island Center for the Book, and brought the Poetry in Motion program from the New York City Transit System to Rhode Island's statewide buses. She's the author of 6 books, her most recent collection of poetry being Year of the Murder Hornet, which you can check out right there or in the back. And in 2016, Tina received the Fellowship Merit Award in Poetry from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. She was also a 2020 Poet Laureate Fellow at the Academy of American Poets, and she is the creator and curator of the distance reading series Poetry is Bread, as well as the editor of the anthology Poetry is Bread. Thank you, Tina, so much for being here. Folks, we're really in for a treat tonight. We've got some great poetry lined up. Let's please give our poets a warm welcome.
Who's on first? Me. Thank you so much for inviting me, Heather, and thank you everybody for coming and for hosting. This is a great bookstore. I've never been in it. It's like a mini mall of goodies. I'm overwhelmed. So thank you very much for having me. Can you all hear me? Because I hear the mic is not that sensitive. However, I am very sensitive, so I'm feeling a little nervous. But I'm gonna read some new work tonight. But I'm gonna give a nod. I always give a nod to each of my books, just because. And also. I'm going to read a poem from Once More with Feeling, which is really a New York City book. I grew up in New York in the East and West Village, and that's the 2nd Avenue Deli on the cover. But someone pointed out to me not long ago that the first poem in this book, Wish List, he thought it was sort of like my mission statement, and I think he's right. But also, in this poem I refer to John Cassavetes, and there's an embedded reference to A Woman Under the Influence, which is one of my favorite films, and Jana Rollins just passed, and she's amazing, so. Wish list. To be the Mary J. Blige of poetry, to come back as Peter O'Toole, to have Peter Falk expose his tender heart to you, as John Cassavetes would make a monument to love of a fragile wife with a nervous tick and strangers from a bar on the couch. To be a poet of the sea, pounding down each syllable till it resembles almost nothing but sound between lovers. To be an unscripted scene of oneself, have a teardrop tattoo inked beneath one eye, to practice right action and right speech, to summon a stiff drink upon waking at the foot of a dune, to be a grain of sand in that dune, to be seen up close at maximum magnification, intricate and entirely plausible. So I'm just going to read one poem from this book body of work. I have 3 children, and my youngest son is not so young anymore. He's 14, but when he was little, he used to always ask, where was I before I was with you guys? And I'd always say, you were flying around in the sky and then you came down. And so that's the reference here. And then there's also a phrase in this poem, go out for sweets and come back. And I borrow that from a Dinez Smith poem called Suddenly Summer, and it's a reference to Trayvon Martin, who you'll remember was murdered by George Zimmerman as he was walking home with Skittles. Youngest son. We used to laugh and say he was naked and flying around with the stars before he came down to be with us. These days, he says, when I was dead, because naked means sexy and he's not a baby, knows what sex is, would rather be dead. But I don't want the word dead around my kids or around any mother's son, so I say, honey, you were never dead. And he says, then I fell like a raindrop into your mouth, and I say yes. How the other morning I said yes when he called fog a cloud on the ground. How he was formed, is forming from rain in my mouth. Just as one day I believe he will go out for sweets and come back. Just like that. For some boys like him, it may be that easy to not be a cloud called back to its rain place, for salt tears not to fill the space left in his wake. So this new book, not new anymore, I wish. Year of the Murder Hornet. My favorite thing about this book is that my oldest son, who's an artist and a photographer, a filmmaker, I used a photo of his for the cover. And there are these 2 little mannequins that this woman in our neighborhood, who's like 102, has been putting out for like 40 years. And she dresses them seasonally. And so when the pandemic hit, they wore masks for 2 years. And so that's the photo he took. But this book was written during the latter half of the Trump administration and the most intense portion of the pandemic. So we used that for the cover. And it won a design award for his photograph, not for my work, but but I'm very happy about that. So I'll read the title poem and just a couple of poems, and then I'm going to read some new work. Year of the Murder Hornet. So in this poem, I have a correspondence pen pal friendship with Mary Ruffel, who's a poet, and during the pandemic especially, we were sending each other gifts all the time, and so one of the things that she sent me was this book from the Salvation Army about house cleaning, so that's the reference inside of it. And there's a reference to a poem of mine in there. Year of the Murder Hornet. Year of the cloud of pollen that chased me to my car across the supermarket parking lot. Year I was overpowered by flowering magnolia petals in a windstorm while walking home. Year of the murder hornet and coronavirus and weather as a system that shaped each day in a way that felt different from the past. Year during which you understood how the neighborhood you grew up in shaped the way you say friend, how the word childhood is the start of a sentence that has no end until you aren't the one saying it anymore. Year of grown-ups with their gravity making everything a question or a fragment depending on their personal weather, whether some of them were green or deep as trees if you're imagining. Year when the way trees speak with each other about each other was more essential than the shade they gave. Year to try to live like trees, upright, yielding, seeking sunlight and silent languages. Year I got a book in the mail about house cleaning as a joke from another poet regarding a poem of mine about life being hard and people's constant quest on the internet to make things easier. Year the cover of the book read, Introducing Your Household Heroes, Regular Products with Multiple Abilities. How multiple abilities sounded more like an affliction than a capacity. Year of nights I lost sleep. Year my mind cradled me. In this book, there are, I'll read this one first. Okay, so this one starts with a phrase that's my breakup scene, which is from a line from a poem called It's My Beach by Terence Degnan. And he's a great poet from Brooklyn, and he reads on Poetry is Bread, my thing on Instagram and Facebook. But you can watch him walking through the streets of Brooklyn speaking this poem if you want. Minority Report. That's my breakup scene, the poet wrote. And everything turned to a near perfect confection of confession and universal feeling. He was Irish, or was he? Does it matter that in a movie I saw a group of young Irishmen having been treated badly by England like themselves to Black Americans? Does it matter that I was skeptical of this comparison despite my love of the Dubliners, my longing to see 1,000 shades of green? Everything is relative these days, but still I try to find meaning. Meaning, if I was my children's first friend, then I hope one day they'll be my friends again. Meaning, if love is a dog from hell, then trust is her rescued cousin. The other day I heard the term conspirituality, which refers to the trend of luring people towards conspiracy theories on the internet with the pretense of spiritual practice. Aha, I remarked, herein lies the history of man. Too often and every day I am thinking about words like wind, my thoughts lift and carry themselves away. How the ephemeral is not soft but sharp when it comes to pangs. A notion of mine that now lives among the trees. Part of this, a friend tells me, is about not being ready internally to reveal what the poem is about. Oh, you with your crystalline vision, I say, tell me about the other parts. There's some essay poems in this book, so I'm going to read just a couple of them. I was reading a lot of essays and writing some essays for the Providence Journal at that time. There's a reference in this one to an essay that came out very early in the pandemic called Fuck the Bread in the Paris Review by a writer named Sabrina Oren Mark. And it was about her looking for a job and the early pandemic panic. Essay on Beauty or Behold a True Story. There once was a man who claimed he couldn't watch Bonnie and Clyde because Faye Dunaway was too beautiful. It's true beauty hurts, but it's seldom debilitating. Overrated may be the way Meryl Streep is overrated in the eyes of a man who doesn't find her beautiful enough. Fuck the bread, a writer's mother once said when her daughter couldn't find a teaching job or yeast during a pandemic. The bread is over, she told her, dismissing life as we knew it. In one fell swoop, bread became language to my mind, no longer elastic in form, all leavening lost, as bread became love to my heart, a knot of needing and need. Another true story is that I'm a mother and a writer who knows about beauty and bread, about language and interruption. I also know the mirror only tells part of the story of a face. The eyes have it, they say, but the eyes can only hold so much. The way a heart can be full and at the same time broken. Different chambers of a single system split. The way Faye Dunaway kills beauty by being the mother of it. How we break bread to partake of it. This last one, essay on mercy. It's all management before mercy for the suits at the rallies and for those alone in the ICU. Not a single mask to reuse, even for the mothers. Grieving in advance is intense, an anguish akin to combat, which it said feels like the second before a car wreck, only all the time. A single prescient moment right before impact that tenses the body for eternity. Bruises the psyche and rewrites the system to run solely on adrenaline. But mourning is not war, and Antigone was not her brother. She sought to bury Polynices because ritual is everything, so a warrior she became. Still, mythology continues to bewilder as if life doesn't train us for death. It all remains grim if we don't see small mercies in our midst, the lessons we might miss, etc. Once when I was young, kissing a boy I didn't love on a mattress in a floor-through off 10th Avenue, I had the feeling I was falling through time. It was then, only then, that life wasn't about saving things, at least not mine. So I'm going to read, I have this new book that I'm working on called Search Engine, and without getting into the crazy Byzantine, and thank you for getting my papers, Lloyd, the crazy Byzantine story of my broken family, I'll just say it's a book about my three fathers. I have a father who was a Marine in Vietnam when I was a little girl, when I was born. He was married to my mother. My mom had me pretty young at 19. And I didn't grow up knowing him past the age of 3. But I was raised by a really loving dad who was very featured in this other book very prominently, sort of like an elegy to him, who was like a Brooklyn guy, New York City cab driver, actor, whatever. And he was my dad. But about 7 years ago, my husband gave me a DNA test as a gift. And then I thought I was half Chinese, half German, Jewish, and some other stuff. But it turns out I'm half Chinese and half Greek. And the Marine was not a Greek guy. And so I, it was actually not too earth-shaking, but it was, it was a revelation for sure. It made more sense because I definitely don't feel Germanic. But I decided when I was finishing Murder Hornet, there's a long poem in there called Of All Things. When I wrote that poem, I realized that my three fathers were going to be the subject of the next book. But what I didn't know was that after I started writing a couple of poems for that new book, that a series of fortuitous events would put me in touch with my Marine dad for the first time in 50 years. So this first poem is called Imaginary Dad, and I wrote it as the first poem of the book. And I sent it in while I was on hold with my dentist to Poetry Magazine, like on a lark, because I never sent to them. And a few months later, miraculously, it was accepted. And between the time it was accepted and the time it appeared in the actual magazine, this imaginary dad and I were in touch for the first time in 50 years. Imaginary dad. Imaginary dad was so imaginary, he ceased to exist. He wasn't sleeping in a treehouse or stalking the woods in fatigues, cheeks smeared green with camouflage grease, a knife between his teeth like I had envisioned him. He was just a married guy living in a small town near a dozen of my made-up cousins, kin so distant they didn't even know to miss me, All their lives I'd picture them fumbling in their pockets through loose change, patting their pants in search of something left behind, all the time never knowing what it was. Or what it was like to eat Twizzlers while watching Apocalypse Now in a darkened theater on Bleecker Street, to think each time a soldier appeared on screen, now there's a dad if I ever saw one, because of course they'd seen one. He was nothing like that, and he belonged to me. A gathering. The Mary in this poem is Mary Ruffo. A gathering. For thee of three fathers, Mary wrote her note on the blank side of a Freedom of and Freedom from Religion pamphlet commemorating Interfaith Harmony Week. Believe in a God or follow in your own light, but never with force, meaning war. So I sent my father a poem I had written about how I imagined him before we had ever even spoken. Did you read it, I asked? Yes, he said. Then there was a pause. What do you think, I wondered. Well, I'm no poet, he joked, but I guess I'd call it a gathering. And thus was I gathered, where we gathered from memory scraps for what is more actual than that my father and I each mean something different when we call a book good. When we speak of the ritual called baptism, which to me is a trial by fire, opposite of how I was baptized at Church of the Holy Cross in Hell's Kitchen, also by the streets of New York, meaning I may not go to hell, even if that's where I'm from. Odd solace for a non-believer, imaginary as any father absent from my baptism for a lifetime defined by war, a father who has since found God, or so I gather, the sharp edge of my wrath, how I sheath my own tongue like a sword. Most searched. A Russian mother asks, which door should I knock on to get back my son? No answers. A Ukrainian grandmother gives a Russian soldier sunflower seeds to scatter, so flowers. Insurrectionist alert, animal print skirt, vision board, extreme hoarders, closed borders, algorithms scan for melancholy content, and more melancholy content shows up. I thought I'd have more time, my father told me at the end. He also confessed he should have listened more. It is my point of view, when you move, you stay alive, one Ukrainian woman told the radio. The air raid siren sounding in the background drowned out her voice. Eventually, all secrets are revealed. Like there was no California in Back to the Future, not the movie, but the space. No Golden Gate, no gigantic Chinatown, just depressing math, relationship managers and team members manifesting wishes through Siri. Some women wishing for brownstones in Park Slope, some men wishing to live like women. We are all equal when we tell our story, says Hannah Arendt, is one way to survive the telling. But I've seen some things and no one's made an equal of me. 1974, in a kitchen in the village, I fed my goldfish or flushed it down the toilet. I was 5, I cannot recall. But that I was a small, frantic god ordering her life around loyalties. Forget the negligence, the negligible, the negligee. Stay with me in the diamond light of stars and love my brain the way I do, the way it opens like a window onto night darkly searching, the way it moves to shut tight against atrocity. Just read a couple more. Suffer the children. We don't even have the language to describe what is happening, my son is saying, on our way to the station downtown. My hands are gripping the wheel as if increased pressure will force a path through the rush hour bottleneck, for his train departs in 6 minutes, and my mind keeps flickering between traffic jams, driveway killings, mass shootings, endless wars, and this morning's lingering affection for him as he stood before his reflection in the bathroom mirror, laughing about how his hairstyle recently reminds him of an ancient statue. Indeed, I could see the way his fawn-colored curls gather like a crown of laurel along his brow, or like ringlets carved in stone on some ancient Olympian, only so much softer than this hard world he so often rails against. Guns everywhere, and college a colossal ripoff. Overpriced yet priceless is my reply, even as I struggle to digest each day's onslaught, a steady diet of fresh slaughter and spilled petrol, even as I fail to distinguish felt reality from from the kind that's lived as if there were a distinction, thinking, I have been through some things I want to tell my son to read. Thomas Mann, who believed if a work of the intellect is to have an immediate, deep effect, there needs to be a secret kinship, a convergence between the creator's personal destiny and the fate of his contemporaries. But this truth feels like a vagary as I press the pedal to propel our car past countless other cars in actual traffic, in actual rain. My son is right again. There is no language for what is happening, only things that break in relentless refrain. The story of a mother and her son, a young God, said, suffer the children. Thus it was. All right, we'll lighten it up a little. I'll just read two more. This one is called Les Pensées sont des flowers, and that means thoughts are flowers, and it's the title of a French rapper named MC Solar. It's the title of the song. And my Marine dad was really into Patton, like read 5 biographies of Patton, because George Patton apparently believed he was reincarnated many, many times throughout history, but always like as an amazing warrior, just coincidentally. So this is called Les Pensées sont des flowers. The monk told my recently divorced friend that no woman would ever fuck him again if he kept carrying around that bag that looked like a purse. We laughed and wondered if merce was the proper term for this cross between a satchel and a pouch. We're both poets, me and my friend, so it's only natural that this end up in a poem. For the valiant way to complain is to create. Sometimes artists get to complain and call it art. Sometimes artists complain and no one listens. But my friend living in a monastery in Germany with the monk for 2 weeks could not speak about how incredulous he was about this declaration, because what did the monk know about sex? I'm thinking probably enough with respect to how it might pertain to a certain type of person. I'm also thinking how Nietzsche said we have art so we don't die of reality, and how movie sets now have intimacy coaches to make sure everything goes okay. How in the silent era days, film sets were noisy as hell because who could hear anyhow? Hell can also be the mind of a person like, say, George Patton, who liked to believe he had lived many lives, always as a warrior dying on a battlefield across the endless plains of time. What mind, you ask, desires valiant death over and over again? Maybe not the kind that sees the sky as a time machine or depicting clouds as a form of portraiture. Patton also proclaimed himself a poet, though he probably didn't have the particular form of fortitude it takes to carry a merce, even though everyone who got near him ended up fucked, and not in the good way. So, this is a poem. My Marine dad passed away unexpectedly in March, the day before I was to fly out and re-meet him for the first time in 50 years. So that was, it was an interesting experience to start writing the book and then have us be in touch and then have the book take this incredible turn, sort of documenting our relationship, and then to have this rupture. I learned many things from that experience. I'm still learning them. But one of the things I learned is that if your father is a Marine, even though he's not technically my dad, he gets a 21-gun salute, and then you get a shell casing from that salute. So this is about that. Letters from the sky. Sorry. Letters from the sky. When a shell casing from the 21-gun salute on my father's funeral arrives, it will be engraved with his name and relevant dates and given to his next of kin. And when his wife presses it into my hand, I will not hold it to my ear to hear waves breaking like my father's fading drawl a final time on the telephone line. I'll peer instead inside its shallow depth to explore its nothingness in search of some residual force or a silent report to insist upon a truth. That war blew apart the man's life to the point he could barely even watch the news. that such a small space should accommodate a belief as deep as duty is indeed a special kind of magical thinking. For a spent bullet cannot be anything other than what it is. Hollow or not, all I've got is this ritual, and a dad AWOL for 50 years, now finally gone for good. Good that I skipped his service on purpose to be alone with my grief. Apt that having missed him in life, I should see him now in the sky of my mind, drifting like a cloud, magical and also good, that he be impervious to bullets flying where energies align with messages beyond my reach. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Tina. Thank you all for coming. I already knew that it was going to be wonderful to read with Heather and to hear a poet I haven't heard before. That was so beautiful and funny. And you referred to the Second Avenue Deli, which is Bonnie, I don't know if you're here from the, oh, there you are. Yeah, thank you so much for arranging this and for doing such a great job. You can hear? This is my translation of a short poem by the great 20th century Hungarian poet Attila József. The Gardener's Song. In a garden of my own making, the trees and I will soon be waking. Shyly, I'll while away the hours, planting seeds and tending flowers. And so I'll sow, and so I'll reap, planting in my sleep. So what if all the flowers are weeds? Don't all of us derive from seeds? I'll drink my milk and smoke my pipe till even my good name gets ripe. If danger's lurking all around, I'll plant myself inside the ground. We need this, east and west. We know this, know what's for the best. And if the world's too late to save, I'll plant a flower on its grave. I think that's the last rhyme you're going to hear from me. This is a very short sestina. Sestina is a very complicated form in which 6 words get repeated over and over and over again, 7 times. And I think this is the world's shortest sestina, you will be happy to know. And I call it, I think of it as my, oh, never mind. 6 words. Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, always, never. Never? Yes. Always? Maybe. Sometimes? No, never sometimes. Yes, no, maybe, no, always. Always, maybe. No, never, yes. Sometimes, always, yes. Maybe, never, No, no, sometimes. Never. Always? Maybe. Yes. Yes. No. Maybe. Sometimes. Always. Never. This is a, I don't know, poem more appropriate to this season. It's called Nostalgia, the Lake at Night. The black water, lights dotting the entire perimeter. Their shaky reflections, the dark tree line, the plapping of water around the pier, creaking boats, the creaking pier. Voices in conversation, in discussion, two men, adults, serious inflections, the words themselves just out of reach. A rusty screen door spring, then the door swinging shut. Footsteps on a porch, the scrape of a wooden chair. Footsteps shuffling through sand, animated, youthful voices, how many, distinct, disappearing. A sudden guffaw, some giggles, a woman's, no, a young girl's sarcastic reply, someone's assertion, a high-pitched male cackle. Somewhere else, a child laughing. Bug zappers, tires whirring along a pavement, not stopping, receding. Shadows from passing headlights. A cat's eyes caught in a headlight. No moon. Connect the dot constellations, filling the black sky. The ladle of the Big Dipper not quite directly overhead. The radio tower across the lake, signaling. Muffled quacking near the shore. A frog belching. Crickets, cicadas, katydids, etc. Their relentless sexual messages. A sudden gust of wind. Branches brushing against each other. Pine, beach. A fiberglass hull tapping along the dock. A sudden chill. The smell of smoke, wood stove fires. A light going out. A dog barking, then more barking from another part of the lake. A burst of quiet laughter. Someone in the distance calling someone too loud. Steps on a creaking porch. A screen door spring, the door banging shut. Another light going out. You must have just undressed for bed. My bare feet on the splintery pier, turning away from the water. Crossword for David. You're doing a crossword. I'm working on a puzzle. Do you love me enough? What's the missing word? Do I love you enough? Where's the missing piece? Yesterday I was cross with you. You weren't paying enough attention. You were cross with me. I wasn't paying enough attention. Our words crossed. Where are the missing pieces? What are the missing words? Yet last night, we fit together like words in a crossword, pieces of a puzzle. very long time, which is to read a brand new poem. And it's long, and that'll be my last poem. I've never read it in public before. Heather has something to do with the completion of this poem, and if she's listening, Tara Skirtu was very helpful in hearing me and read it to her and looking at it to give me very good advice. I swore I would never write a pandemic poem. This is a pandemic poem. It begins with two short epigraphs. It's called Corona Blues. Because of coronavirus, you are going to be quarantined, but you have a choice. Do you A, quarantine with your wife and child, or B, There is only time for this merciless inventory, Evan Boland, Quarantine. The poem is in two large parts. 1. It's the night before shutdown, and we're determined to do something heroic. What were we afraid of? After all our years together, we decide to get married. First thing in the morning, we call City Hall. We're told to go to the courthouse. It's raining, the traffic is heavy, and there's already a line. When we're finally at the counter, the clerk tells us we'd been misinformed. We have to apply for our license at City Hall, on the other side of town, in the heavy traffic, in the heavy rain. At City Hall, we get on another line to get the application we need to get approved at the courthouse to get our license at City Hall. And City Hall, the security guard reminds us, will be closing at noon, indefinitely. Back at the courthouse, we find two lines, divorce and paternity. A guard tells us to pick the line that's shorter. Divorce is shorter than paternity. The lady at the counter seems happy to see a couple who aren't miserable yet. She tells us we need to see a judge. In the empty courtroom, the bailiff yells at us to stop whispering. The judge is nice. She asks us to swear we are who we are, and she believes us. She explains to us the waiting period. It would be easier to wait, but we can't wait. The rain keeps getting harder. Back at City Hall, we need to find a justice of the peace. But the ones who work there are all engaged. On a list they give us, you find a dimly familiar name. You like her name. You phone and she answers. Come on over, she tells us. She works right across the street. She's married people before, and she's good at it. Her office mates are enthusiastic witnesses. Everyone's happy. Then she reminds us we need to get our license. She grabs her raincoat, says, "Come on," and races with us back to City Hall. She sails into the office. "Hi, girls." "Hi, Denise," they call back. "Stop everything. These nice folks need a license." "But the printer's down." "Get Jack," someone yells. It's almost noon. Then Jack appears and slams the printer hard enough to print out our license. The office quietly returns to its shutdown, and we, with barely a minute to spare, we seem to be married. 2. We used to eat out every night. Every night. I'd ache for a home-cooked meal. Now, home is the only safe place to eat. So we order our dinners delivered from the same places where we ate out. But our favorite places are closing. We have to cook, which is often a source of tension. Increasingly often. We must avoid the danger zones, each of us fearing for the other's safety. Quote, "Bread for days on end drives all real thought from my brain," unquote. One morning, a neighbor tells me she saw someone talking to their cat. "I told my dog," she says, and we both laughed. It's increasingly hard to concentrate. I want to be productive, but nothing works, nothing new. I look at things I abandoned. I worked hard on them, but I don't know how to fix them. We watch the news until we can't stand anymore. Then murder mysteries for the happy endings. And old movies. In a Lonely Place, From Here to Eternity, Night of the Living Dead. Every disaster movie, someone says on TV, begins with ignoring a scientist. Duck soup. A friend sends us a link to a video. Old dancing stars synced to a funk soundtrack, kicking up their heels with such lightness of being. We watch it over and over. We never want it to end. You get an email from an old friend. Dad was doing fine, determined to live to 100. On his birthday, we had a big party, and he was alert, happy, chatting, and blowing out candles. There was absolutely nothing wrong with him. Then he got the virus. First, I blamed the faceless pandemic. Now I think I'll blame the president. The Queen addresses the public, people of all faiths and of none, and tells us we're discovering an opportunity to slow down, pause and reflect in private or meditation. We'll be with our friends again. We'll be with our families again. We will meet again. A doctor warns people from New Jersey, stay home, please God, stay home. The president gets the virus. A friend leaves a message. Is the bastard dead yet? We hold our breath. We don't enjoy our schadenfreude. Then we do. We know we're lucky to be together, but tempers flare at the slightest misapprehension. How can anyone bear the isolation of living alone? Hard enough to bear the isolation of living together. If we get the virus, we want to get it together. Eventually, there's a break in the weather. We meet a friend for a stroll in the open air, a pastoral walk in a beautiful old cemetery. People we like are buried here. A few days later, we put a down payment on a plot. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and especially a very warm thanks to Bonnie and Adam and all the hardworking staff here at Booksmith. And my fellow readers, Tina and Lloyd, with whom it's truly an honor to appear. So I'm going to be reading from a new book that appeared in April. It's called Auguries Divinations, and the book is a kind of nostos, or a tale of homecoming. It's about a young girl growing up in the suburbs, and she's aware of things not always being what they're supposed to be, and of what sort of wrinkles under the rug and gets whispered about on porches, and she leaves, as I did, and then she comes back as an adult to New England with sort of a new sense of herself and the landscape. So I'll just be reading 5 poems because I know we're a little tight for time here at the end. And I always like to, when I'm an audience member, to know what I'm in for, so 5. This first poem is called Ghostology, and it's the first poem in the book. And when I was 10 years old, my family moved from Hyde Park to a suburb of Boston, Newton, next door. And I sensed even then that not all was what it seemed, and I had a kind of Nancy Drew curiosity about this new place. Ghostology. Coming back to the old neighborhood, like a TV set of childhood, this place I fled, wide-eyed to its subtle underside, not wanting to be a girl in its wilderness of wants and jealousies, its contests of id and image, its theater of perfection with no safe haven for its kid conscripts, its walk-ons, its cast of underpaid extras. On the corner, the forsythia still blooms like an alarm clock, or like the hair of Jesse Linehan, the 3rd grade's crush, although he chewed his tie and never tied his shoes. And the brown shingled house where Ruanne and her mother Susan lived after the pyrotechnic divorce, the philanderer locked out and left howling on the porch until cops arrived and convinced him to give it up. The first rule here is do not disturb the peace or permit parking. The right to quiet enjoyment of sprinklers and play sets, gas grills and badminton, swinger clubs and pervy sex. The Gilliforts, caught running a gambling ring, disappeared into Texas, while the Metcalfs moved to another town where they still might cut the lawn gingerly with hand mower and shears, all but wincing for the grass. Pacifist vegans, suspicious as I was of this motley paradise, this zip code worn like a badge of Calvinist election, where surfaces enforce a silence as lethal as measles, one that leaves no disfiguring mark or pox, but gums up the jaws, and kept me from caring too much or saying exactly what I saw. I believe that if you really want to know what's going on in a place, you need to talk to the babysitters and the pharmacists. They'll fill you in. This next poem is a short piece. It's called Cul-de-sac. And I know it's a poem that Lloyd likes. And I heard from a mutual friend that this was a poem he was actually reading to people over the phone during the pandemic, which charmed me. And when I was a kid, I loved words and language and sat down like most nerdy kids and read the dictionary. And I was very intrigued by this word cul-de-sac, which was in the English dictionary, and I was perturbed by what it actually meant, and my imagination went from there. That old rage for order, how father drove a square-mouthed mower over and back, each row of neatly trimmed grass cut just like he told his barber, boy short, regular. Oh, pioneer, taming this joke bit of prairie, no bindweed or dog shit on his verder. Mother, meanwhile, absolved counters of crumbs, paired 24 socks to matching mates, hummed some half-remembered Sinatra song as she dusted the porcelain figurines and never used, quaintly painted china plates. In the antic business of having nice things, an obligation of display, a furnishing. Each squat house in our street's orb eyed the others, envious of another's paint job, carport, or owner. Left alone, I built model planes with torn pocket parachutes, rode a blue scooter in dizzying loops of the prescribed circle. Adults acted as if living here were preferred or exalted, but I had looked it up. I knew it meant bottom of the sack, the fate of drowned cats, a sickly child or a rabbit, gathered up, held head down in a satchel or a bucket. When the hands closed in, I'd make a run for it. This next poem is titled Anne Sexton, and as I got to know my new hometown, I also went to the library and asked the children's librarian, so who are the famous writers from Newton? And she pointed me in the direction of Anne Sexton and Maxine Kumin. And I later met and interviewed Maxine Kumin when I was in graduate school and got to talk to her about her friendship with Anne Sexton. They became deep friends and sort of enabled each other's success, I think, in many ways. So this is sort of my envisioning of Anne Sexton, whose ambition and desire and energies were really kind of outside the box of the place and the time that she was trying to live in. Anne Sexton. Suburbs, like brassieres, shape and contain their contents. Wire under lace, seamliness and seams along the wildness of woods, except for the renegade deer or tom turkey who struts straight down the thoroughfare. Suburbs, like musical theater, lend everyone role and song in sitcoms between commercials. The point is repetition. The point is novelty, delimited to the height of a privet hedge, a hidden affair. How stark the coordinate machines of the city, its concrete floors and carapaces of new money. Whereas suburbs are seersucker and silk hose, Dimitas or highballs on the shaded porch. In the bedroom, late afternoons, I watch crenellations of light mount the ceiling, take its white blankness hungrily. Cotton sheets accept the skin of a woman surviving her despair, who broils a Sunday roast, prattles behind a pram, fusses about collar starch and geraniums, while she writes of her madness, masturbation, men, menstruation. The point of the living room is stilled life. The point of the kitchen is producing for the reproducing. But I am the feral creature who wanders the street, peering in windows, wide-eyed, alert, not a stitch under her skirt. This next poem is sort of a tribute to all of you, because I know you probably had to get through Boston traffic, which is always kind of epic to be here tonight, and I'm really quite grateful for that. And I should also say too that I have no animus or bad feeling about people who drive Subarus. So just a disclaimer, if you're a Subaru driver, I fully endorse Subarus, they're great cars. And the poem is titled After Catullus, and when I was in high school, someone told me that some of the raciest love poems in the Western tradition were written in Latin by this guy Catullus, and that motivated my studious learning of Latin grammar for several years. So this is kind of a reply to Catullus as well. After Catullus, stoplights, school buses dawdling by sports fields, so many Subarus with becalmed dogs riding shotgun. Traffic exists to test, they say, Christian patience for our fellow travelers, or to teach Zen detachment from the hurry of temporality, or to remind atheists of all the other ways we deliberately waste time. Odium, Romans called it, those builders and sons of empire, wary of leisure's sidle into idleness. My hatchback hums, self-contenting machine, through the hectic streets. I clutch and shift foot to foot on levers demanding pressure and touch. I long to be home, naked, free from workday's clock, clothes, heels, politic notations. To my neighbors, stuck in this traffic, admiring their hair, phone, or relatively even teeth, imagine the blue film in my head where you take me again, again, in a high, low, or darkened bed, ravishing my mouth, kneading my hungry breasts like bread. And this last poem is called Labor Day, and that's fast approaching, I realize. I guess I shouldn't say that, we're still enjoying August. The poem could also maybe be subtitled Why I'm Not Coming to Your Barbecue, but I'll leave it at that. Riding home with the windows down, I know but I'm missing the picnic and wine mom's Chardonnay, microbrews and Frisbee, or a grill of charred meat, chilled rosé. A sweet little kid sneaking a brownie as big as her head. We offer one last salute to summer before the hurried business that is September. School slowly narrowed to the end run of commerce. And like a cartoon or cosmic joke, I'm the feminist professor stuck behind a truck named for a mythic woman warrior. Or the world's largest river. This optimized delivery service threads subdued streets with the stealthy ease of a hearse, making its almost silent doorstop annunciations. At least I'm not late for a barbecue where I'd calculate the potato salad's bacterial load and wonder if my sleeve's toxic spray might hold those blood-hungry bugs at bay. So goes the romance of nature which does not care for anyone in its rude force. What we tried to weed and bed, fence off and fertilize. What I sensed was a sad charade, watching my poor father aerate the tired lawn with soccer cleats and a pitchfork. As a kid, at ritual gatherings, I'd slip off when the cousins got peevish and listen to adults posture about politics. These days, it's still more work than leisure to eat a neighbor's hamburger and chat about a safari or market rally. 7 stages of kitchen renovation. Junior's ukulele. I think of the women in my family preparing each feast, working the second shift, wearing the seasonal cheer. On their collective behalf, I drive straight home, where I won't count napkin rings or iron a tablecloth, solve an insult or spare the sauce. I know it's of no general concern whether I spent the summer writing and unwriting a book and hoping my lover isn't audible over the air conditioner that rattles, bleats, sweats, and purrs undeterred. I have no daughter, no son, some might say no sum to show for my day's math. How I've sought to add, or just as carefully subtract. There is license in a life that appears less. Its deepest cares never turn to work. With a lover who is not my co-investor or delivery service. So I wave to be friendly to the block party rave and seek out my beloved who sits reading at dusk, awaiting the company of my lust, patient as a myth or river ambling south. Thank you all so much. Now we'll have a Q&A. We may have the A's.
All right. Thank you to the 3 of you so much for sharing your beautiful work. And now, it's your time to shine, dear audience. If you have questions, just raise your hand and I will call on you. Yeah.
What if they have any answers?
If you have answers, I would love some. Just generally. Yes, gentleman in the back row.
Hi. So I co-lead a biography seminar with Patricia over here, and we're studying Elizabeth Bishop this fall. I know Heather did her PhD on Bishop, and Lloyd, you studied with her. What's that?
I also did my
Oh,
PhD.
there you go. So not to exclude Tina, but wondering how the 2 of you, how your poetry has been shaped by Elizabeth Bishop, or just maybe in general.
I don't write anything like Elizabeth Bishop. I wouldn't dare try.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, it's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I said I wouldn't dare try to write anything like Elizabeth Bishop, and I couldn't if I tried. But I love her work.
I'll second Lloyd's Valentine sorts to Bishop. I came to Bishop's work in college, I think, and initially she attracted me in part because I felt like, especially her early poems were kind of shouldering me off. Like I couldn't quite get to the essence of them, but that intrigued me, and the more I read, the more enchanted I became at how versatile she was as a writer and how she could write virtually any kind of poem and ace it, whether it was a sestina or whether it was blank verse or something entirely different. So, you know, as most of us know, she only published like less than 100 poems in her lifetime, but in some ways she's been one of the most influential writers of her century. And I don't think I write like Bishop, but she's a source of almost endless inspiration. So, thank you.
I think she liked your poems. And I know she didn't like mine.
But she loved you, Lloyd. And one of the thrills actually, so I got to know Lloyd on the page first. I was reading his criticism of Elizabeth Bishop in college. And then when I moved back east for a postdoc, I actually got to meet the Lloyd Schwartz. And I think it took me about 15 minutes to just kind of get over being verklempt at being in his presence. And then it was a special thrill when you were talking about Bishop and referred to her as Elizabeth. I almost fell on the floor the first time. You know, it was I felt so close to her through.
It took a long time to get to the point when I could refer to her as Elizabeth. She was Miss Bishop for many years after the first time we met her.
Well, that was an honor you won.
We have another question. Yeah, go right ahead.
Just good over. Thank you all for being here. That was beautiful. I had the honor of taking a poetry class from Tina back in Rhode Island when I was a resident in training. It's been a really long time.
Oh my gosh.
I'm a fully fledged doctor now. Here we are.
Yeah, you are. Oh my gosh.
But it's a beautiful class. You're an amazing writer. It's really fun to follow your work. I'm curious how all of you dig into you all have different cadence and style, but there's emotion embedded in so much of that. Then I'm curious all of your processes. You know, do you feel like you know what you want to write about right away? You sort of read it and come back to it, especially struck by the idea of the Marine father. You know, how do you get to that place, like the core of the core? I'm wondering if you find it right away or if your process is more coming back, and I would just be curious to hear how you each do that, because the vulnerability in each of your work is there, and it's just so different and beautiful each. So.
Well,
One thing I'll say is that I read that poem, A Gathering, which was referring to when I had written Imaginary Dad, not knowing, you know, really just imagining a dad. And then my Marine dad's response was, like, I guess I'd call it a gathering. And that seemed to me really articulate in terms of actually the way I operate, which is, it is like a gathering. Like I'll be, and I've learned over time to trust my process a little bit more. So I'll wonder why something keeps returning to me. And I kind of just kind of transcribe. I just take a lot of notes, and then over a couple of weeks I'll see often, and sometimes it's just a bunch of crap, but sometimes I'll see that I've been subconsciously building a poem, and that the language is just, I'm pulling it out of the ether of my subconscious, of my external observations or environment, or and I'll gather my notes and type them up, and I'll start to understand something. And then sometimes it takes a really different form. It'll go in a whole other direction. Like right now, I don't think I'm completely done with this book search engine, but I got through a first draft with my friend Sean, who is a good reader. And then I thought, okay, well, I think, I know I don't have more poems to write. It's maybe whether I'll be tweaking these poems or removing some of the weaker poems. And then I said, cake theory. And I was like, cake theory. And I was like, oh, that's the next book. And I don't know what that means yet. I mean, I know what cake theory is. It's like this Chinese economic theory about equitable distribution. I'm not an economist, I don't know why it came to me, but I'm going with it, and I feel like over time, I'll figure out why. It may not yield anything worth reading, but I'm just gonna sit back and wait. So that's kind of how I operate. And then there's a lot of really deliberate, intensive revision. It's not like inspiration.
I think I always begin with a subject that I kind of know what the poem is going to be, what's going to be at the center of the poem, and then the challenge is to get the poem to work with that center. Doesn't always. And sometimes it will take a very short time, and sometimes it will take a very long time. And I'll just mention that the sestina, the 6-word sestina, took 10 minutes to write and 6 months to revise. And the revision consisted entirely of punctuation. The words were already there in the order that they had to be in because of the form. But how to make it mean something.
I always love questions about process, in part because it gives me a chance to try to think about what my process might be. And I think it's not too different actually from what Tina and Lloyd have described. There's a little bit of gathering for me, but usually before I sit down, I need to have the first line in my head. And that first line is like a path into the wilderness of the poem. So sometimes I know for months that I want to write about something, but I'm waiting for that first phrase to come to me. And once I have that first phrase, it may not end up being the first line in the poem at the end, but it's sort of my on-ramp into the subject. And sometimes that first line also kind of helps me figure out what the shape of the poem might end up looking like in a weird way. So it's, I'd say 3/4 intuition, and then Franco Harris says then you just kind of go on your nerve, you know, and hope for the best. I'd also say too that for me, writing is as much about revision. In fact, there's way more revising than there is inspiration.
We want to be mindful of time, so I think that'll be it for our Q&A. But we will have a chance, if you have questions for our poets and you didn't get to ask in the Q&A, they'll be here signing books at this wonderful table, so you can certainly ask then. Thank you all for being here, for supporting poetry, for supporting these 3 poets in particular, and of course, thank you Heather, Lloyd, and Tina for sharing your work with us. Everyone, let's give them one more round of applause. If you would like to buy one of these incredible collections of poetry, you can do so at the back counter over there. And like I said, the poets will be here to sign. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Get these out.